Welcome, one and all, back to the Viper's Nest, where I was supposed to talk about some lore on Halloween. It's obviously not Halloween. It is, in fact, November the 3rd when I'm recording this. I had a plan. I thought about recording a video on Halloween, but, well, if you have kids, Halloween is kind of a busy day. So my plan became to record the next day on November the 1st, but unfortunately, my son got his hands on my microphone cord and broke it. So I had to shop around for a new one. I finally got one yesterday, so now here I am recording on November the 3rd. So consider this a belated Halloween present to you guys, I guess. So anyway, the lore we're talking about today, fair warning, it could be considered scary. It is definitely gruesome, so bit of a trigger warning for you here. So what we are talking about today is an event that was known as the Attack of the Dead Men. It was on either August 5th or 6th, 1915. I don't have all the information in front of me because I don't want to be one of those lame guys who just reads off of a Wikipedia page. So I'm doing most of this from memory. I studied it back in college, 10 plus years ago, and I think I remember most of the important bits. So let's get into it. So the Attack of the Dead Men, also known as the Battle of Oswiec Fortress, I'm sure I mispronounced that. The name of the fortress is spelled Oswiec. So Oswiec. I'm just going to pronounce it Oswiec. It's easier that way. So the attacking forces were roughly 7,000 men on the German side, and the defenders were the Russians, and they had somewhere between, I think, 1,500 to 2,000, something like that. So anyway, the Oswiec Fortress was located on the western border of Russia between Russian territory and Germany. So the defenders were led by a man named, I did get his name because I'm probably going to mispronounce it, Lieutenant Vladimir Karpovich Kotlinski. This was the guy who commanded Oswiec Fortress during the attack, and the Germans were led by a man with a much easier name, Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg. So the Germans obviously wanted to take down or destroy Oswiec Fortress so then they could have an easier time crossing over into the Russian territories. So, as I already stated, the Russians were very heavily outnumbered during this engagement. But I guess give Paul von Hindenburg credit. He knew that even with superior numbers, attacking a fortified position head-on was, in general, a losing proposition. So, Marshal von Hindenburg decided to soften the area up first, as it were, and he launched a combined chemical and artillery bombardment attack against Oswiec Fortress. So, like the regular artillery, just, big guns and all that, but the gases he used, well, gas singular, I guess, was chlorine gas. So I'm sure you probably remember from your high school history class that chlorine is already bad enough on its own. So Hindenburg worked on surrounding the area, set up various defenses of his own, I guess, utilizing what's called concertina wire. So concertina wire is basically barbed wire on steroids that is wrapped up in a big, wreath formation and then used by soldiers, essentially deployed much like its namesake instrument, the concertina, which it kind of just unspools. I guess Americans would probably know it better as like an accordion style thing. So concertina wire was deployed on the field and during trench warfare, where they would essentially deploy the concertina wire and then put them inside the trenches, so when the enemy attacked a position, rather than just falling into a trench and, I don't know, maybe breaking a bone or something like that, they essentially fall into a pit of barbed wire where the more they struggle to get out, the more they cut themselves up and bleed to death. So concertina wire was bad enough. But they were also deploying, like I said, chlorine gas. So at dawn, the German forces bombarded Oswick Fortress with chlorine gas and standard heavy artillery, which is a nasty combination. And the Russian forces, I mean, they had a fortress. They might have been able to weather the artillery bombardment well enough, but they didn't have proper protection against a chlorine gas bombardment. So, not only is getting chlorine gas, on or in you bad enough, but the Russians were also breathing it in. And you know what you have in your lungs is moisture. And what do you get when you combine chlorine with moisture? You get something called hydrochloric acid, which is another thing that you should know from your high school history class as something that can do a very, very, very bad things to the human body. So here's where the real horror and gruesomeness starts to kick in. All right, so pretend for a minute that you are just a standard old German infantryman in World War I, and your commanding officer, Field Marshal von Hindenburg, said, "We're gonna take this fortress. We're gonna gas bomb it. We're gonna, shell the crap out of it with artillery. It should be a cakewalk. There should be little to no resistance whatsoever in dealing with this place." So you and your buddies get all suited up in your protective gear, and you start heading into the battlefield, walking through the green mist. So you walk up on this fortress expecting absolutely no resistance. You're expecting a cakewalk, as it were. Easy peasy. But then you see something moving in that green mist. And then all of a sudden, about 100 Russian soldiers, who essentially look like zombies, hence the name Attack of the Dead Men. They're pale, bleeding from the eyes, nose, mouth. They're running at you, coughing up blood and actual literal bits of their own lungs. And as this formation of 100 guys charges straight at you, you look into their eyes, and the only thing you see in there is the Russian soldiers' absolute desire to kill you before they inevitably kick the bucket themselves. So you see this, and you understandably freak the fuck out. You turn and you run. And as you're running and you hear the yelling and the charging footsteps of the Russian soldiers behind you, you also hear some of the surviving artillery guns of Oswick Fortress start roaring to life and shelling your guys back. So as you're running away from the charging dead men and the thunder of Oswick Fortress's guns, before you die, you realize one last thing. You set up concertina wire traps behind you, and you run right into your own traps. And if your own traps don't kill you, then the dead men behind you are gonna fucking finish the job. So what ended up happening was, obviously, the Russian soldiers of Oswick Fortress got poisoned to death. So out of the between 1,500 to 2,000 men, almost all of them died. Only about 100 or so were still combat effective enough to do anything. So they all decide, fuck it. They're dead one way or another. They might as well take some Germans with them. So, Commander Vladimir Kotlinski rallies the few remaining guys he has, puts some on the big guns of the fortress that actually survived the initial artillery bombardment, and said, "We're just going to charge right into the teeth of the German forces." And, by the technical definition, Commander God, these Russian names. I'm just going to call him Commander Vladimir. That's his first name. So Commander Vladimir, by the technical definition of the term, actually won the battle of Oswick Fortress, the Attack of the Dead Men, because the 7,000 to 8,000 German forces were, understandably, they were scared shitless when Commander Vladimir and his boys charged out at them and just started messing them right the hell up and forcing them to run right into their own concertina wire traps. But it's definitely what you would call a Pyrrhic victory. Essentially, almost no one on the Russian side actually survived the Battle of Oswick Fortress. There were a few, but nobody got out of that completely unscathed. But they did end up repelling the first attack of the German forces on Oswick Fortress, which allowed the Russians at the fortress to evacuate what little survivors and equipment could be salvaged, and then destroyed the fortress behind them to make sure that the Germans weren't able to take it and use it against the Russians. But a real gruesome and scary story from World War One. Like normally, in today's day and age, you hear things from like World War One and Two, where you shouldn't feel bad for the German forces, but in this particular instance, I do kind of feel bad for the Germans and how badly they were embarrassed by what should have been, by all accounts, just a perfect victory for them. They should have been able to just gas the fortress, shell it with the artillery, roll up, take it over, bada bing, bada boom. There you go, duns. But then the forces of 7,000 to 8,000 Germans were repelled by about 100 Russians plus whatever they had on the surviving guns of Oswick Fortress. That's oof. That had to sting, man. That had to be embarrassing for the Germans to get their asses handed to them that freaking hard when they had not only a good plan, but also some pretty serious numerical superiority. But at the same time, I feel worse for the Russians because, man, dying to chlorine gas bombardment, that's gotta be just one of the fucking worst ways to go. Actual reports from the battle detail the fact that they breathed in the chlorine gas, hydrochloric acid formed in their lungs and essentially ate them from the inside out to where they were coughing up blood and actual solid chunks of their own lungs. Like, yikes, man. Gruesome. Damn. But, that's gonna do it for my video on the Attack of the Dead Men. If you're interested in it and want to learn a bit more than the very, very basic casual overview that I just gave you, I'm sure there's videos on YouTube by actual people who hold actual history degrees who can walk you through the entire thing much more detailed and in-depth than I could manage with the time I have to record these videos. But regardless, I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sorry I wasn't able to get it out on Halloween. But thank you for listening. Liking, subscribing, and commenting would be appreciated. Doing the YouTube dance. And I will hopefully be able to record some stuff with my buddy Noodle tomorrow, where we can maybe talk about the new Halloween movie that came out. Anyways, thank you for listening. I will see you on the next episode, and as always, have yourself a wonderful day.